All right, welcome back to another episode of the Ruling on the Field podcast. I'm your host, Seth Mendelson, alongside my brother, Sam Mendelson. And Sam, we're going to get right into it because we've got some breaking news, some heartbreaking news if you're a Cleveland Browns fan, after coming off this very impressive, probably the biggest victory of the Deshaun Watson era as a Cleveland Brown. It's now reported that he's done for the season. And this is a big blow for this Cleveland Browns team that's been, wanting to make a difference and an impact in the AFC North, finally beat the Baltimore Ravens, looking good, all this hype, the defense looks great, and now you lose Deshaun Watson. Sam, what are your initial thoughts on this report?
It's a huge blow for the Browns. Of course it is. I mean, they've been playing great defensively all year. We've talked about it a couple times on this podcast that we were at a game where the defense was good against the Ravens, but you had DTR, first start ever, the rookie, and they just never were able to get things going. They got a couple things going with PJ Walker, who's going to be the anointed starter now with Deshaun out for the year. But Deshaun looked his best he's ever looked in a Cleveland Browns jersey this past weekend. The comeback they did on the road against the Baltimore Ravens, if you're a Cleveland Browns fan, you're coming away from that saying there's a good chance we might even host a playoff game. Like the Dog Pound might host a playoff game. And I think that is a huge blow to not only the Cleveland Browns fans, but it really opens up the AFC North, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes about how it's so wide open. There's 16 teams in the AFC, and it seems like 14 are in the mix, with Tennessee and New England being the only two that are out. But in terms of what this does for the Cleveland Browns, another point that I also want to bring up to you is the fact that this team had Josh Dobbs on the roster last year. A lot of teams have missed on Josh Dobbs, right? They had Jacoby Brissett, and Josh Dobbs was there as a backup. And then they went to the offseason and they were like, okay, we drafted Dorian Thompson-Robinson, DTR, and now we feel like, he's taking that step. And Josh Dobbs, we're just going to let him go. Like Arizona just took him, right? They said Colt McCoy wasn't the option in Arizona, and they just went with Josh Dobbs. And now we see what he's doing in Minnesota, and it seems like we can make the argument that the Jets should have traded for him, or, a couple other teams that definitely could have used Josh Dobbs. But sticking with the Browns, they're now having to rely with PJ Walker as their starting cornerback to get them into the playoffs. Right now, if the season ended, they're in the playoffs. Do you feel good with PJ Walker as your quarterback? Nick Chubb also posted on his Instagram a photo of Bane holding the Batman mask. Maybe he's coming back to Gotham. Maybe he's coming back to Cleveland at some point this year. I don't think that's a reality. So if Nick Chubb's not your savior and Deshaun Watson's not your savior, it's up to that defense right now because there's not a lot of great weapons on offense. And Deshaun Watson made everything look good, going 14 for 14 in the second half against the Ravens in that huge comeback win, which could have been when Browns fans were going to look back at it and go, that could be the turning point of the season, even though they've beaten San Fran with PJ Walker. They nearly beat Seattle with PJ Walker. PJ Walker is now in a position where he has to lead this team to a playoff run and potentially more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's devastating for Cleveland fans who finally have this glimmer of hope where it's like, oh my God, we just had this big comeback win in Baltimore against a division rival. We have a chance. And we were at a game in Cleveland earlier this season, how much they want this victory, how much they want Cleveland to be a playoff team and a successful team. You finally get that feeling just for it to be momentarily, and now it's gone. And now with Deshaun Watson, you're not as confident. But the reality of the situation is Deshaun Watson's been on and off the injury report all season. So PJ Walker, it's not like he's coming into this offense not working with the first team and not getting those reps, not knowing what the scheme is. It's not, I guess it's somewhat of a silver lining. It's not obviously the situation you want to be in when you're trying to make a push to the playoffs, but you do have some familiarity with PJ Walker under center, and this defense is stout and can go up against any high-power offensive team as we've seen all season. So, look, to completely write them off as a playoff team would be absurd. I still think there's a lot of talent in this roster, but losing Deshaun Watson, especially as we know the whole contract situation that he's in, losing that guy that's supposed to take your team to that next level is definitely a hard pill to swallow in Cleveland. But the way the AFC North is shaken up, we're talking about one of the most competitive divisions right now. And do you think the Baltimore Ravens can keep their position as the division front runner for the rest of the season, or the Bengals are making their push even though they had a tough loss. Pittsburgh's winning games under Mike Tomlin as they always seem to do, and Cleveland is still right in there.
Yeah, I mean, if I was looking at the AFC North, I would still say, even though the Bengals are last, that the Pittsburgh Steelers are the frauds to me. You look at the last two games, Green Bay and Tennessee, both in Pittsburgh, which is a tough place to play in, Steel Country, Steelers Nation. They came down to the final play of the game, and it was a pick in the end zone. Like, they could have gone either way, right? Will Levis and Jordan Love did enough where for it seems like the 15th straight game, or definitely every game this year for sure, where the Steelers offense was outgained, right? Like, their defense is good. Is it the best defense in the division? Probably not, but it's a great division full of great defenses. The loss to the Bengals was a real tough one. I mean, Tyler Boyd probably should have caught that touchdown pass in the end zone. And we'll commend CJ Stroud later on in the podcast for what he's done the last 2 weeks with these game-winning drives. Like, the guy is just built for big moments. But it's very interesting because the Ravens have been so dominant at home. We've talked about it. I bet against the Ravens at home with Seattle and with Detroit, and they showed up and they balled out. And it seems like anyone that they throw behind that offensive line, whether it's Gus Edwards, this rookie Keaton Mitchell, that they're going to do anything. And one more point on Deshaun Watson. Browns really went for it this year. They put his cap at $19 million for this year. For the next 3 years, Seth, it's over $60 million. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But they've clearly went all in. We all know that they went with a full contract of all guaranteed money to Deshaun Watson, the first time it's ever been done in football history. How that's going to play out for them, I don't know. But, I don't even think Kevin Stefanski's, the best coach in that division. I mean, Harbaugh, Tomlin, two of the longest standing coaches in the league. I really like what Zach Taylor's doing in Cincinnati as well. I think that they still have everything going, even though they have some big games coming up. They have the toughest schedule remaining. The Ravens have the second toughest schedule remaining. And then you got the Browns at the 26th. So the Browns have a little bit of an easier way to go than the Ravens and the Bengals. But I do think at the end of the year, we'll talk about 3 AFC North teams in the playoffs. That one team going out, will it be Cleveland? Will it be Cincinnati? Will it be Pittsburgh? Your question was, will Baltimore hold on to its division? I think it's a coin toss. It can go either way, and it starts with a big game this week.
Well, this week will be a very interesting shakeup for the AFC North as you have all teams playing each other. You got Thursday night Bengals at Baltimore, and then Sunday at 1:00 you've got Pittsburgh at Cleveland. So this could be a very interesting, telling week of the future of the AFC North has in store. And I do agree it is a flip of a coin at this rate, considering how close these teams are. But just in general, the AFC playoff picture is wild right now. It seems like almost every team not named the Tennessee Titans has a chance. I probably also the New England Patriots I can put in that conversation too. Yeah, I just have a personal reason to not think the Tennessee Titans are going to make the playoffs. I just enjoy seeing them at the bottom of our division. But yeah, it is wild to see the AFC, the way that it's looking right now. I think there's going to be a lot of changes between what our current wild card standing is. Are there any teams, if you're looking at the standings right now and you're looking at that wild card position, I mean, Bengals 5-4, they're out of it. Bills 5-5 after a terrible way of losing on Monday Night Football. Who do you think are legitimate threats to a wild card position with the Browns at 6-3, Houston 5-4, and Pittsburgh also at 6-3 that are currently holding those spots?
There's so many, I want to say like balls in the air, but there's so many different ways this can go. Let's just also put some credit on the Denver Broncos, who have won a few games in a row against the Chiefs, against the Packers, and then at Buffalo. There's always a couple teams from last year that don't get into the playoffs this year. And we're all saying like, oh, Minnesota was maybe going to be the team that falls out, or, clearly the Giants are one of those teams that was in it last year and aren't going to be it this year. So there's always some new faces in the playoffs. But the Houston Texans, for me, are that team that's really, not only are they in a position to make a wild card spot, they're in a very good position, like the driver's seat for now in the AFC South. They've already beaten Jacksonville in Jacksonville. They host Trevor Lawrence, who hasn't looked good in a few weeks. He really has struggled. I know he's been banged up a little bit. He's played through an injury against the Saints, which they came out with a win after blowing a loss. They got blown out against San Fran. Trevor Lawrence, to me, and the Jaguars were a shoo-in to win the AFC South with all the flux that there is. Now you're looking at the Colts, who wasn't a pretty game. Probably should have taken the under of 17 if you really wanted to, but they get a win in Germany over the Patriots. And slowly but surely, they're getting things going together, and they've won a couple in a row. The Broncos could be one of those teams, again, big Sunday night game against Minnesota and Josh Dobbs, two teams going in the right direction, but unexpectedly, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Vikings haven't won a game with have won 5 straight without Justin Jefferson. They're on fire with Josh Dobbs. He seems like the savior in Minnesota. Denver, all of a sudden, after everything we saw with Russell Wilson, I mean, you saw that game too, Seth, on Monday night against the Buffalo Bills. That was the best Russell Wilson looked to me. Over 25 rushing yards. He made one of those plays that Russell Wilson normally did in the past with Seattle, where he came out of a play action pass, spun around a defender, and then threw a pass that had as low as 3% probability for a completion. And somehow Cortland Sutton made one of the best catches of the year. I put that up with Jake Bobo. CeeDee Lamb also made a great catch this week with one hand, but Cortland Sutton made it with two hands, but he made such an amazing play. And all of a sudden, the Broncos, who let Frank Clark go and they let Randy Gregory go, they're in the mix as well. I don't really think the Chargers and the Jets are there, and I think the Raiders are a nice story for the last 2 weeks, but they've been, the Jets and the Giants and the Jets. I mean, everyone's beating the Giants and the Jets this year. The Jets face Buffalo this week, so another big match. One of those teams I think will be out of the playoff mix, in my opinion, with the loss this week. But if it's the Jets who come away with the win, all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, if Aaron Rodgers is really thinking about coming back mid-December, do they have a legitimate shot? But I do think where the AFC stands right now, that one of Pittsburgh or Cleveland will come out. And I think that since he comes in, and I think other than that, it's 3 AFC North teams in the playoffs, and then it's the Houston Texans, with, unfortunately, your Colts just missing out, as well as the Bills, the Raiders, the Chargers, the Jets, and the Broncos.
Definitely shocked to hear you not having the Bills in the playoffs. You don't think they can figure it out? You think what you've seen these last few weeks is just an all-tell sign of blowing up this organization in the offseason?
You know what? Honestly, yes. I don't think it's blown up. First of all, they fired Ken Dorsey. I don't think he was the problem, but their defensive tackle came out last week and was like pleading for people to sign a petition to fire their offensive coordinator, who will only go down and remembered as that game against Miami last year, where he was smashing the camera on the little GoPro in the offensive coordinator's booth. And it just went wild, like losing it. It was like all those memes, like when you have a parlay and the minus 500 team blows it, you're just like smashing it.
Yeah.
I've seen 3 primetime games. First of all, if you take 4 primetime games, with the Jets game in New York week 1, that they probably should have won when Rodgers went down 4 plays into the game, or 4 seconds, it almost felt like. They should have won that one, but they should have got called for a holding penalty, PI, against the Giants, and should have lost that one. Honestly, they never call it against a Hail Mary, but there was a holding penalty or PI against the Buccaneers that wasn't called. They should have lost that game after being up handedly in that game. And then on Monday, they get that PI called against them, and then they miss the field goal, Denver, only for 12 men to be called, and the defensive 12 men on the field, and they get another chance, and Will Lutz hits the game-winning field goal. There's too many mistakes. You look at the one quarterback for the last 5 years who's led the league in interceptions, it's Josh Allen. He came into every year, especially this year, saying, I'm going to cut down the mistakes. I'm going to do it. He's gotten chances on 3rd and 5 to get that 6-7 yard pass, and he's throwing a 25-yard pass into double coverage. Stephon Diggs is not getting as many targets as he should, as one of the best receivers in the league. So much so that Trayvon Diggs, who's sitting at home with the torn ACL, is saying they got to get 14 out of there. Josh Allen didn't start balling out until Stephon Diggs showed up.
Yeah, I saw that.
All these rumors before the year that Diggs wanted out. This has not helped that front. I think Sean McDermott is probably the coach on the hot seat right now in terms of all the coaches that you could think of right now. I think Sean McDermott, because of the expectations, I mean, they went from being like heavy favorites to make the playoffs to being minus 150. I saw on some sports books to not make the playoffs. Like they're minus money to not make the playoffs because their schedule is not easy. They've got the Cowboys coming up. They've got the Jets this week, who's always had their number for the last few years. They've got some really tough games. They've got the Eagles coming up. Like their schedule is very tough down the stretch, and they haven't played good football all year. And the games that they should have won, they haven't won. I mean, it's just not been a good story in Buffalo. And yes, surprisingly, I'm saying I don't think Josh Allen and the Bills make the playoffs this year.
Well, it's crazy. I mean, you mentioned also that like every year there's turnover where, some teams who didn't make the playoffs do, and as a result, some teams that made the playoffs the year before don't. I don't think anyone saw the Bills being one of those teams going into this season, and it's just been how the cookies crumbled, I guess, for Buffalo this year, where they haven't been able to string along good football. And yeah, definitely a surprise, but you make valid points.
Well, let me ask you one question about the Bills. They're 5-5, right? I want you to hear their schedule and tell me what they finish at. Home to the Jets, at the Eagles bye week, at the Chiefs, home to the Cowboys, at the Chargers, home to the Patriots, who they've already lost to, at the Dolphins. So out of those 7 games, what's their record? What do they go down the stretch in your opinion? If you think that they're making the playoffs, or if you don't,
I think they're going to beat the Jets, lose to the Eagles. Then after the bye week, they're going to figure their shit out, beat the Chiefs. I think they're going to beat the Chiefs. You heard it here first. In Arrowhead. I think that's going to be starting to like turn things around, lose to the Cowboys, then win out. So
you have them going 5-2 the rest of the way and going 10.
Yeah, I still believe that Buffalo is a good team. I still believe that they're. I don't believe that I'm not counting them out just yet. I'm also going more on the bold side, but we'll see. We'll see. Time will tell if it really is as bad as it's looked right now. Obviously, my predictions won't be right, but I do think that especially after a bye week, they can start figuring some stuff out, and you just need to win one game against a really good team, a contender team, to get your momentum back. And I think that will happen. And I think it starts this week once they beat the Jets, who maybe not isn't a good team, but a strong defensive team. If you can get a big win, you get some type of confidence back and you ride that. But I feel like we've talked a lot about the AFC. I want to touch about the NFC playoff picture as well, because in my opinion, my humble opinion, clearly I'm someone who makes some bold statements. I think the playoffs are pretty much already set in terms of the teams that I believe that are in a playoff spot right now. I believe will be in the playoffs by the end of the season. Now, where they will be positioning in division, that I'm not 100% sure. Because, Minnesota's been playing great. Dallas is playing great. Like the wildcard teams are making a push for that division. But when I look at the NFC right now and I look at the wildcard, like I don't see any team that I believe can make a push for that wildcard spot. The only caveat to this is that maybe the NFC South division winner, who currently the New Orleans Saints are leading that, might change. It might be Tampa Bay or Atlanta, but I do think New Orleans is the best team in that division. But if you're looking at this wild card right now, Seattle, Dallas, Minnesota, all with 6 wins, and then Tampa, Washington, Atlanta with 4 wins right under them, I don't see any turnover there. I really don't.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Seth. I think the 7 teams that are in the playoff spots right now are probably going to be the 7 teams, with, again, the one caveat being the Saints. I think, again, the Saints, I was expecting more. In a dome against the Vikings and Josh Dobbs, I thought that defense would come out. Derek Carr, they also announced this week that Marshawn Lattimore and Michael Thomas suffered significant injuries. So they're going to be missing some time, which is great because I just traded for Chris Olave in one of my fantasy leagues. Is Derek Carr going to play this week, coming off a concussion? They said he didn't suffer anything too serious, but they might have to go to Jameis Winston, who in classic Jameis Winston made 2 unbelievable throws for touchdowns and then threw 2 horrendous interceptions. And the game that the Saints, fell behind early and then just never really had a chance, even though they were pushing late in the game. But they probably have the most talented team. I think, Baker Mayfield's done a really impressive job in Tampa Bay. So I'd probably still give the edge to Tampa Bay. They're probably wishing that they didn't blow that game to CJ Stroud, which we'll have to get back to because we need to talk about that game in a second. But yeah, I think that the only question is where those teams finish. And there's some interesting things that are happening. I mean, you got next week, Thursday night on Thanksgiving, the Sunday nighter, Seattle versus San Fran. That could be for the division lead. And that's the first time those two teams are playing this year. So they play one more time after that. You've got the Vikings and the Lions haven't played yet. They play twice the remainder of the year. And we know that Philly's got a bit of a tough schedule with Kansas City and Buffalo coming up. If they lose a few games, then they have to go to Dallas, who, by all account and purpose, they're the best team right now in the NFL at home, winners of 12 straight. And again, we went to a Colts-Cowboys game last year, but you look at who they face at home, the Jets, the Patriots, the Giants. They've had a lot of easy
Rams.
The Rams with Matt Stafford out. So they've had a lot of easy home games.
They're blowing out these games, though, which is something to be said.
37 points at home, right?
Yeah.
And again, is facing Tommy DeVito, Danny DeVito, as we joked about it last week, the biggest test? No. But they winning the games. You can only win the games that are on your schedule, right? And so they have played a lot better at home, and they're going to be facing the Eagles that, it came down to one or two plays where they could have beaten Philadelphia. Where will Philadelphia be in a couple weeks? If they win these two games, obviously they'll be pretty much riding high towards that NFC division title, but those division winners or those division leaders right now aren't necessarily locked in. But to your point, and I agree, the NFC seems like a lock, whereas the AFC is just such a huge toss-up.
Yeah, it's really just a tale of two conferences where you have the AFC where completely up for grabs, all of these teams really battling for a spot, whereas the NFC, it seems like a pretty steep hill to climb if you're not currently in a wild card spot. But when you look at the top of the NFC, you talked about them a little bit, the Detroit Lions, who just had a very exciting game against the Chargers, high-powered offensive game. Maybe we'll go down as one of the games of the year, and that'll be, I personally just enjoyed watching that game immensely, seeing the numbers from Amon-Ra St. Brown and Keenan Allen, and it did not disappoint. It really didn't, and kudos to the Detroit Lions team who have really built honestly like a juggernaut in offensive side and defensive side. They were a really, really fun team to watch. Justin Herbert, I feel like always goes into these high-powered games, plays incredible, throws 4 touchdowns, and still finds a way to lose because the Chargers defense is just not great. They haven't been great for a long time.
Charging, right? Like that's what they do.
Yeah, so true. But yeah, that was just an incredible game, and we saw some incredible performances by receivers in this game.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to talk about one thing that I think goes very under. It doesn't get talked about as much in the world of football, which is game management. And Dan Campbell, we've seen it from the start of this year, going forward on 4th down in his own zone against the Chiefs in week 1 and making those bold calls when it comes down to it. There were 6 games this past week, Seth, the most in NFL history in 1 week, that came down to a game-winning field goal.
Crazy.
The Lions, in my opinion, optimized their opportunity the best. It was 4th and 2. It was going to be a tough field goal. They got a 6-yard first down pass to Sam Laporta, and then the Chargers, as we just said, they beat charging Brandon Staley, who again probably should also be on the hot seat with Sean McDermott. I think one of those guys, probably both of them, if they don't make the playoffs, which looks like they probably both might not, in my opinion, will be fired. But that's another conversation for another day. They had no timeouts. So what did the Lions do? They took a knee and took a third knee, and then they called their final timeout. Whereas the Broncos threw out their kicker on like a speed rush and forced everyone to come off because the clock was running and they didn't have any timeouts. I don't know what they were doing. They got away with one for sure, but the Chargers, they gave the Lions every opportunity to just come back and play a game that they won, and they dictated with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs both running over 100 yards. David Montgomery had a huge 75-yard touchdown that was a little controversial because I thought he stepped out, but clearly the ref said he didn't step out, and he got the touchdown. They showed why Jahmyr Gibbs was drafted so high. He's been a great explosive weapon for them. You talked about Amon-Ra, and I want to talk about the receivers in just a moment, but they utilized their timeouts perfectly. They kicked the game-winning field goal. And again, the Lions just time after time, unlike the Bills, they're playing good situational football. They're not turning the ball over. And it seems like the Lions could also play either style of games. If they need to play a defensive game, they can play a defensive game. Herbert was playing great. 4 touchdowns, balled out, had an amazing game. Without Mike Williams, Keenan Allen stepped up huge. You had Jalen Guyton in the end zone. Austin Eckler was still a big factor, but they couldn't make a stop. And how much of that is on the Chargers and how much of that is on the Lions, I don't really know. But the Lions offensively right now, I think they're one of the more exciting teams for what they have around them. And not to change the subject, because I know you want to give your thoughts on that Lions game in a second, but where do you see Amon-Ra St. Brown, who in my opinion has top 5 wide receiver potential? I have him as my 6th, and we talked about it off air, and I'll get to that. My top 6 or 7 in just a moment. But where is he, and with what he's been doing the last 6 weeks with games of over 100 yards in each week? Where is he ranking in terms of your top receivers in the NFL right now?
Yeah, I think Amon-Ra, the sun god, is just putting on a show. He is every game. I feel like he's proving to himself. I think he's already made the point to whether you're a fantasy fan, Detroit Lions, whatever. But every game, I feel like he goes out to prove why he should have been drafted higher. Like that is something that it will never not be in his mind, and I think it drives him to play at this elite level. And by all means, he is an elite wide receiver in this league, and he is showing it week in and week out. Him and Jared Goff have this incredible chemistry and connection. The one game he wasn't out, like you saw a different looking Jared Goff, where they focus more on their running game and obviously having, the reliable safety blanket of Sam Laporta. But, Amon-Ra St. Brown does everything in terms of exceptional route running, making tough catches, finding the openings. He's just a very intellectual wide receiver. It's almost like similar, I find, to Travis Kelce, where you can find the holes in the zones. That's what I see of Amon-Ra St. Brown. I just made a big trade for him in fantasy, so I loved watching him even more. Having that sun god on my team, I feel blessed. I feel ready to win my first fantasy championships in that league, but I digress. You know what? Where do I rank him in terms of my top receivers? It's hard because I mentioned last week, I think CeeDee Lamb, the way he's playing, and keep in mind, when we talk about rankings of receivers, we're talking about this year. It's hard to, look at the last 5 years and make that case. And I'm sure it would change if that was the case. But this year, this 2023 season, where am I ranking my receivers? Obviously, with Justin Jefferson injured, I still have to have him at the top. He's just the guy. He's him. He when he's playing, he's an absolute difference maker. And it'll be exciting to see him with Josh Dobbs. So I probably still have Justin Jefferson up there. I personally have CeeDee Lamb in my top conversation. I think he just does everything. He's really taken a step up in his game. AJ Brown's got to be in that conversation. Tyreek Hill's in that conversation. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, I might have him over Jamar Chase right now, is kind of the way that he's playing. Or do I talk about Noah Brown? No, I'm kidding. He's had 2 great games.
You said AJ Brown.
I did say AJ Brown. So that's probably my top 5 right there. I think Jamar Chase has actually taken, a step down. Obviously, he's been injured. Him and Joey B's had a pretty slow start. But Amon-Ra, to me, is a top 5 wide receiver this year.
Oh, 100%. I agree. And, we were just talking a moment ago with the Buffalo Bills not utilizing Stephon Diggs and not giving him the targets. It seems like Amon-Ra St. Brown, my apologies, gets at least 10, 12 targets. A guy who also is getting 10, 12 targets and bringing them in as well as CeeDee Lamb, first player in NFL history with 3 straight games of 10 receptions or more and 150 yards. And I think your argument last week was very valid, and it was just validated again. And he was asked after the game on Sunday, are you one of the best receivers in the league? And he goes, well, if you don't believe me, let's see what happens next week. I'll see you there in Carolina. And this is a guy who's been motivated all year to prove that he's in that top tier. A lot of outsiders, a lot of naysayers saying that he was not a top receiver. Some people even having like a Nick Wright from First Things First, having a guy like Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams ahead of him. In terms of what they've done this year, you can't put that in the same realm of what CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown have done, right? He had Tyreek Hill as number one. I don't have Tyreek Hill as number one. When I look at the receivers, I look at like the guys that can make the most plays, run the best routes, and then ultimately give their team the best chances or elevate their team's chances. And to your point, the five that you mentioned, I mean, Jamar Chase it's been slow. I still think that he's in there for me, Justin Jefferson. Even though he's out, he's a game changer. Although you can make an argument that the Vikings are a better team without him. 5 straight wins. No, I digress.
I don't know if they're better. They've really stepped up when they had to. But
I found out this weekend that Josh Dobbs and TJ Hawkinson train in the offseason together. And then I look at what he did last week. 11 receptions for $134 and a tutty. And I'm going, glad I have Hawkinson as my tight end, because this is a guy who I thought was going to take a huge step down when Kirk Cousins went out, and he's only gone better from a fantasy standpoint and better what he's doing in the game. They're using him more efficiently. But yeah, I think it's definitely Tyreek, AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra.
You said you didn't have Tyreek. Whoa. Well, you said Tyreek's not.
I've changed it. You made a very good argument. I said it off screen that Tyreek was like my sixth guy. I still have Cooper Kupp, but I can't say Cooper Kupp's in there, even though I still think he's one of the best receivers in the game. I don't know if I can put him in that realm for Puka, as your buddy says it. Puka Nacua has had a better year than him, like statistically, and so I can't put Cooper Kupp in that conversation. So I changed my mind.
So just for context, Sam goes bold off screen.
No, trust me, I will say some bold things. I said the Bills aren't making the playoffs.
It's true. That's true.
I was
on
screen. You need to
art of the deal.
Art of the deal. Sure, you need to cut me some slack. Sam is cutting in, as Kenny Powers would say, and I think, I think to your point that it's the same in terms of wide receivers, but I don't put a guy like Garrett Wilson or Devontae Adams, even though I think Devontae Adams over the last 5 years is probably number one or number two of best receivers in the game. For what he's not been able to do this year, a guy like Amon-Ra and CeeDee have stepped up. And I like what Garrett Wilson's been doing in New York without Aaron Rodgers, and I'd only wish what he could have done with Aaron Rodgers. Talking about one of those best catches, we talked about Cortland's son, Jake Bobo. Garrett Wilson's catch on opening night, on Monday night against the Bills, where he bobbled it and caught it, also goes in there. Maybe we'll do a conversation down the road of our top 5 best plays of the year, and those 3 are definitely nominees. But it's been a very interesting, and again, I know you were talking about Keenan Allen, what he did. He's really stepped up his game. He's always been one of those really good position wide receivers. I saw on Sunday a guy who could be more explosive than he normally is. When you need that 3rd and 4, that 5-yard pass on 3rd and 4, Keenan Allen's your guy to move the chains. He gets open. Similar to Travis Kelce, he finds the spot in the defensive zone where he can just stop and Herbert will find him. I saw a little bit more this past week of him being more explosive, and they need that in LA because Mike Williams is their big playmaker. He's out for the year. Quentin Johnson's starting to turn it up, the rookie from TCU. But they lost Palmer. He's been on IR. They really don't have a lot of weapons in LA. And he's, again, one of those top 10, top 15 receivers. But we didn't even talk about Stephon Diggs, and it's because Stephon Diggs, who, in my opinion, for the last 5 to 10 years has been that number, within that top 5 range, but he's not getting the showings in Buffalo. But I want to go from. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily a fair comment. He is Stephon Diggs is currently 5th in receiving yards and tied 2nd for touchdowns. So after one bad game, it is very easy to maybe. True. These rankings are changing each week, and we're obviously talking very high on CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra and Keenan Allen, who just had these big games. But Stephon Diggs has consistently still had high numbers in the top category. So I don't think we can discredit what Stephon Diggs brings to that Buffalo Bills offense. It's just, again, as you had touched upon it, and I'll send it back to you, but the fact that you only threw the ball to him 5 times, I don't care if it's Patrick Surtain who's covering him. He is a guy that you need to get involved with your offense. Your offense is more dynamic and explosive when he's involved. and it's on the combination of the quarterback and the play calling to make sure you're getting the ball to your playmakers, and they just weren't doing that. But I just wanted to make that point about Stephon because his numbers speak for themselves.
It's true. I guess even though his numbers are great, it almost feels like it should be better because it seems like sometimes he goes, like the last couple of weeks against New England, and then yesterday it's like under 50 yards or just 50 yards, and you're like, how is this possible? Like Travis Kelce getting 17 or 14 yards in against the Dolphins in Germany. You're like, how is this possible? But one thing that's definitely possible is, and I want to talk about it because in my opinion, it is arguably the story of the year, CJ Stroud with these game-winning drives. We talked about it on the last podcast, the impressiveness that we saw against Tampa Bay. I even made the argument, was that Tampa Bay's defense bad or was that CJ Stroud's good? And you quickly said, no, you got to give him his kudos. You got to give him his flowers. CJ Stroud is balling out. And then he goes into Cincinnati, where Cincinnati's been playing great. They're coming off a win against San Fran, a dominant win in which they looked fantastic. They're playing at home in the jungle. And you're thinking, this is a tough game. This is a game that the Houston Texans went into. They had over 20 players on their injury report listed. That's insane to me. Usually you see 5, maybe 10. There's a team banging up. They had 20 plus players on their injury report going into this week. And what does CJ Stroud do? He makes plays. Noah Brown, again, steps up. Devin Singletary, the former Buffalo Bill, who maybe they could be using him because, they benched James Cook and then they brought him back out. He also made one of the crazier play, James Cook, where he got a ball stripped out of his hand and continued running at full speed and picked up the ball. He could have had a touchdown if he didn't fumble the ball. It was one of those crazy plays, but I digress. The Bengals and the Texans, that's CJ Stroud, what he's been able to do the last 2 weeks, 2 game-winning drives. How impressive has he been to you? Is he a shoe-in with every quarterback that there is in the AFC, and we can name them all, but is he a shoe-in for the Pro Bowl if he continues to play this way? Is he going to get the Texans a home playoff game? Is he going to get the Texans a playoff game? What can you say about his maturation with a first-year head coach in Demeco Ryans, a rookie quarterback? What can you say about what they were able to do and what they showed you against the Bengals on Sunday?
Yeah, shooing for Pro Bowl, if he's playing this way, that's, without a question. I know the AFC has some big hitting quarterbacks, but efficiency speaks volumes for a quarterback, especially a rookie quarterback. You were making the comment about Josh Allen 5 years straight where he's led the league in interceptions. Here's CJ Stroud, a rookie quarterback, 15 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Like, the guy is very smart with the ball. He's very reliable. That was something that you even saw in Ohio State. It was a big thing about him going into the draft class. He was a very efficient quarterback, very reliable. But that doesn't always translate in the NFL. But for CJ Stroud, it has been. And it has been very impressive to watch. We talked about it last week even. You mentioned, if he does win this game in the jungle, do you start talking about him in this MVP conversation? And lo and behold, a lot of people are. Dan Orlovsky is saying he's the current MVP the way he's playing. And especially when you look at his numbers compared, because you have to play a comparative game for the MVP race. Yes, it may not be these large numbers, but they are good across the board. Like, everything he's doing across the board is elite. And I have to say, I said it last week, I'll say it again, he is elevating everyone around him. That is a sign of not just a good quarterback, but a Pro Bowl quarterback who can make the players around him better. Noah Brown went for 7 catches, 172 yards. Tank Dell, another 100-yard game and a touchdown. Like, these guys who, going into the season, you didn't expect much from this offense, are playing at a very high level with the best teams in the AFC or in the league even. And you got to give them a lot of credit. But I also think, as much as it, we love talking about the quarterback and CJ Stroud, and it's just impressive seeing a guy in his rookie season doing what he's doing, Demeco Ryans might have to be considered coach of the year right now, top of the candidacy, because, you saw him in San Francisco lead the best defense in the league for a few years. And he was able to come into Houston, an organization that he played for, and to have immediate success is truly impressive. Like, it really is. And, I love what I've seen Shane Steichen do with Indianapolis. I think he's really created a culture for our organization. And I'm not just trying to toot my own horn of the Indianapolis Colts and be biased. I just think that what I'm seeing from these new coaches, not named Frank Reich,
he's not a new coach. He's coached in the NFL before.
New head coaches. These new head coaches. Sorry, that's what I'm trying. My point I'm trying to make. But I realize I appreciate you correcting that. But yeah, Demeco Ryans has really allowed for his team to believe they can win, and that is very, very important to have in your locker room. A coach who didn't come into that season being like, "Oh, we have a rookie quarterback, we have a young team, we'll just see how it goes." I bet you from day one, Demeco Ryans is like, "We're coming in to win. We're coming in to make a statement," and that team has rallied around him, and they're playing great under him, and yeah, very impressive victory. Very impressive game-winning drive again from CJ Stroud, and what should only be a promising career going forward for this young quarterback.
CJ Stroud's first game in Ohio, obviously, since leaving Ohio State. To me, the more impressive thing is, he threw that interception late in the game when the team was up, didn't even need to really throw it, and he marches down and scores the game-winning touchdown. It seems like this guy is built for these moments. We talked about him last week as a deep, long shot for the MVP. He's minus 2,000 for the offensive rookie of the year. They also drafted a guy right after CJ Stroud in Will Anderson, who I want to do our betting. This is this week's betting slant, our betting topic, which is we're going to look at the defensive rookie of the year and the defensive player of the year. So they drafted Will Anderson. And just to give you some numbers, he is ranked 4th at plus 1,800 or 18-1 odds. Seth, there's 3 guys ahead of him. Brian Branch, 15-1. Devin Witherspoon. And then the inside track goes to Jalen Carter. You're looking at some of those names on the board. Joey Porter Jr. is up there. Will McDonald. Where do you see this going? I mean, is Jalen Carter having that much of an impact for the Eagles that he is leading? I saw him have a nice little moment with Zach Martin saying, "I can't believe that the Eagles got you, man. You've really got good games." Jalen Carter said, "Hey, man, I respect you. You're a future Hall of Famer." So it was really nice to see that, brotherhood moment between two guys after a really hard-fought game between those two players. Is Jalen Carter the defensive rookie of the year in your opinion, though?
I would say that the way that this season's shaping up, he is probably he's clearly the favorite to win it, but I definitely think coming in, stepping in for Javon Hargrave, who had a incredible season last year, doing what he's able to do for that defensive line, playing alongside Fletcher Cox. This is the guy who's going to take over Fletcher Cox's role in this defense moving forward. I definitely think he is a disruptive player. That's what he was in Georgia, and the fact that he slipped in the draft class to Philadelphia is something the league should not have let happen, but here we are. And I do think it is very much his award to lose at this rate. But I, as a cornerback, I played cornerback throughout high school, watching Devin Witherspoon has been so fun. And this guy, he was hurt at the beginning of the season, but the moment he touched the field, he has made an impact and he's made a difference for this Seattle Seahawks secondary. And I definitely think at plus 175, you're getting better value than Jalen Carter. And I think he's the closest person or the next man up to win this award. And we'll see how the rest of the season shapes up, especially if, you're talking about Seattle. If they win against San Fran or maybe start taking the lead in their division, there's going to be a lot of people starting to realize just the important role of this Seattle Seahawks secondary. And Devin Witherspoon sets the tone. Some of the biggest hits of the season, some of the biggest plays of the season, and I think he's an absolute game breaker in terms of what he can do. So I do think the way that the odds are shaped up, your 1-2 are really and it's really a 2-man race for that defensive rookie of the year. Sam, I don't know if there's anyone else that you would really want to throw into that conversation. Maybe Brian Branch, but
yeah, Branch has been solid, but it's a bit of a long shot for me. And I mentioned Will McDonald. He's 80-1, so he's a long far. Lucas Van Ness, also these guys have been good. Yeah, I think it's a two-horse race right now. I honestly, to me, I would put my value on Devin Witherspoon because I think there's a couple games coming up where he's definitely could have a big performance. And I think Jalen Carter is just a cog. He's a very good player, but he's a cog in a very good defensive line. And maybe he's just been a little bit better with Fletcher Cox being in and out of the lineup. But you're right. Those are the top two guys. Whereas the defensive player of the year, a little bit of a different story. You got Myles Garrett now with the inside track at plus 160. You got Micah Parsons and TJ Watt plus 225. But I think there's a lot to be said at 22 to 1 odds, Max Crosby. In my opinion, I think this guy is the best defensive player this year. I mean, Myles Garrett for sure, but I'm watching Max Crosby and what he's bringing to that Raiders defensive core. You can't really name anyone else on that Las Vegas Raiders defense. I know Spillane had that big interception on Zach Wilson and said after the game, this really nice moment that his wife's pregnant, all these wonderful things. Daniil Hunter leading the league in sacks 50 to 1. Fred Warner 40 to 1. There's a lot of really interesting names. Nick Bosa, the reigning defensive player of the year, 40 to 1. Do you see any value in a guy like Max Crosby at 22 to 1? Or is it really between Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons, who, again, I think has been good but hasn't been Micah Parsons type level, and then TJ Watt?
Well, look, if the award went to the player that disrupted the offensive scheme the most or the player who got double teamed the most, then Micah Parsons would be a shoo-in because, he is a guy on that Dallas defense that you're constantly having to watch. He's all over the field. So the numbers may not be there, but like the hurries, the pressures, like all of those are still there, and which is why he's second on this list and definitely worthy of that spot. But look, as a guy who is a Colts fan and has watched every Colts game, there's one guy who, in my opinion, he's the top of the list. Myles Garrett is absolutely deserving of this award the way he's playing. He single-handedly beat the Indianapolis Colts, in my opinion. He blocked a field goal. He had 2 sacks in the end zone. Like, he did everything in that game. He was an absolute disruptor. What he does, obviously now when you have Zadarius Smith alongside him, it opens up what he's able to do even more. But even if you're thinking about it from a betting standpoint, with the rest of the season being what it's looking like for the Cleveland Browns, not having Deshaun Watson, if they do in fact make a push for this playoff or a wild card run, it's on the backs of number 95, Myles Garrett. Like, what he does is just honestly game in, game out, has the potential to go for 2+ sacks. He can do pretty much, he can do anything you want as an edge rusher. He is something that he's nightmares for quarterbacks. Like, this is a guy who, for me, it's really the way he's been playing. I would make him a lock, but there's still a lot of football left, and we'll see what happens. But Myles Garrett is definitely the guy this year.
No, you're absolutely right. And this is a guy who has a grave for all the quarterbacks that he sacked. He did that last year for Halloween, and he's probably added a few more names this year of all the quarterbacks he sacked. Leads the league, right? Sorry, my apologies. He leads the league, tied with Daniil Hunter with 11 sacks, 4 forced fumbles. I think he is also the clear-cut choice. I also I love the Max Crosby story. I'm a big fan of him. I think that when you take him out of that Raiders lineup, the fact that they're 5-5, I mean, I think that's on the backs of Max Crosby. But to your point, I think you hit the nail on the head. The way the Browns season is going to be shaping up the rest of the way, should they make the playoffs, should they win the division, that's on the backs of Myles Garrett. And that's why they're going to win that's why he's the front runner. He owns the clubhouse lead, so to speak, in the defensive player of the year awards. We're now going to shift, Seth, to our 2-minute warning topic. The biggest game of this week coming up, the Monday night of the Super Bowl rematch. It's the Kelsey brothers, the Kelsey Bowl, if you will. But it's Jalen Hurts versus Patrick Mahomes in Arrowhead. Again, this was played in Arizona last year, and the Chiefs came out on top. They're playing now in Arrowhead, one of the toughest places to play. Both teams coming off a bye, which should be a nice little recharge for both Jalen Hurts, who was a little banged up against Dallas, and Patrick Mahomes, who wasn't banged up but struggled in that second half against Miami. The question isn't to you, Seth, who's going to win, but who is this game more important to in terms of their future in the rest of the season and what this win this week could mean for them?
Yeah, and this by all intents and purposes, could be a preview for this Super Bowl. We could be looking at a back-to-back Super Bowl matchup between these two teams. But for me, I think this game, in terms of where the impact that this have on the rest of the season, has to be the Philadelphia Eagles. You're currently the best record in the league right now at 8-1. You have a chance to go 9-1 and really take a commanding spot. Almost, there's no locks, but you're really looking at that potential bye week by winning this game. You also get that confidence of beating the team that you lost to in the Super Bowl in their home arena, in their home field. And I think the Philadelphia Eagles, after coming so close last year, they made a lot of moves to their team. They brought in DeAndre Swift. They just got in Kevin Byard. We talked about Jalen Carter, Defensive Rookie of the Year. They made a lot of moves around the roster to win this game, to win this exact game against Kansas City, to prove that your team is the best team in the league. You know you're going to probably be facing them in the Super Bowl again. You know, if you make it through the NFC, this is the team that you've got to beat in the Super Bowl in Las Vegas in February. And having that mindset and that confidence to win it right now, Monday night, is big. It's a big step in your direction. It's proving that you're taking those steps forward, that the people that you brought in to your team are getting you to that next level. And I just think if the Eagles win this game, they prove to 9-1, take a clear commanding lead of the NFC, and you're just going up from there. I think it's a huge turning point for that team, and I think that's why it's as meaningful as it is for them.
A lot of very good points being said. You can also make the argument that the Eagles haven't really been any really strong teams, so winning this big game on the road, they also have some tough games coming up against Buffalo, Kansas City, and Dallas, so this would be a big stone in their step. Or a big stepping stone is what I meant to say. I'm going to take the other side, obviously. I'm going to take the Kansas City Chiefs, and why it's important to me, or why it's important to them for them to win this game, is because we talked about earlier, the AFC is a logjam. There's a lot of games that are going to come down to. They still have to face Buffalo. There's still some really tough games that they have on their schedule, and the Chiefs' success starts with them playing at home in the playoffs. They have never played a road playoff game, obviously Super Bowl being a neutral site, unless you count the Tampa Bay one being a home playoff game in which they lost. But they played in Miami and they played in Arizona. You know, they're playing every playoff game at home. It'll be interesting to see when it eventually does happen, should it happen, if Patrick Mahomes and the company do need to go on the road, what they're capable to do in the playoffs. But a loss to the Eagles, they still have some tough games remaining too. This could be a real tough point for them because, you know, they do have the tiebreaker against Miami, but they have some really interesting games, and there's teams who are still creeping up that are right there. It's not like they have the space that the Eagles would have if they won. They fall back into that middle pack, and sure, they could still win the AFC, but this is a huge point for them. They're coming off a game which they didn't look great offensively. They struggled against Denver. They lost the week before. So they need to get things back. They need to get things going. Andy Reid, fantastic off a bye week. Doesn't seem to lose off a bye week. So this would be a huge win against his former team, similar to how he did in the Super Bowl. But this is the team that's ranked second in defense and 12th in offense. A little bit of a surprise. I think if I told you beginning of the year that their defense would be outperforming their offense, you'd be like, well, they got Mahomes, they got Kelsey, they still got Pacheco and all those things going. They haven't found things working as smoothly this year with their offense that they have in years past. They don't have that deep play ability, and they're still working on some things. It'll be interesting to see how that comes out of the bye week and how it plays moving forward, but I think the Chiefs need to look at this as a must-win game almost, because if they don't win this game, all of a sudden they're in a bit of a situation where they're back. I shouldn't say must-win. Let me cut that back. I know we're cut for short for time, but I think that this is a very important game for them, and that if they do win it, it only furthers their chance to, again, clinch the AFC, get that bye, and play at least one, maybe two home games and have home field advantage. And I think for that reason and that reason alone, this is an important game with tough games still remaining on the schedule. The Chiefs need to take advantage of coming off a bye week and winning a home game this Monday night.
Well, this Monday night definitely is going to be one of the biggest marquee games of the season. This is a game that NFL fans have had on their calendar since it was released. The Super Bowl rematch, the Kelsey Bowl, you know, you gotta assume Taylor Swift will be in attendance there, so there could be some karma going in for the guy on the Chiefs. Some good karma,
that's
but
a Taylor Swift reference at the
yeah,
end.
that's as much Taylor Swift as I know. But because to me, I mean, Travis Kelce put her on the map. I know.
Wow. Some
I,
real
I,
Liverpool fans are going to be real angry, saying some DMs saying, "What are you talking about? Taylor's made him."
Well, look, week 11 is going to be a fun one. Monday night going to be an incredible game. A lot of division matchups this coming week, including 2 AFC North games as well. And we talked about how important that will be for that division. So it will be very interesting to talk about a Sunday night game of 2 teams that have been 2 of the hottest teams in the league, arguably right now, with Minnesota and Denver clashing in Mile High. So we got a lot of football to talk about next week. As always, this is Ruling on the Field. After further review, we had a great time talking about football with you. My outros are going to keep getting better.